if we give people a cool experience or a cool encounter with a wild animal, maybe next time they'll think twice about not stopping their car if they've hit an animal, unfortunately, because, I can tell a story of that time I stopped because I wasn't sure if the animal had passed, and only to find out that it hadn't, and that animal went on to make a full recovery and go back to the wild one day. So being able to sort of share our experiences, share the stories that our animals have brought to us, and hopefully making that connection for people and what's in their backyard, maybe we'll be able to continue that trend of people, seeing something happen and trying to fix it.
You're listening to the Behind the Village podcast. Our guest today is Krystal Hewitt from Speaking of Wildlife.
Speaking of Wildlife is a small nonprofit wildlife education center. We aim to provide permanent sanctuary to non-releasable wild animals, to do education that sort of fosters an appreciation and a respect for the animals that we share our space with in our own backyards. And then in addition to that, we also offer advice and assistance for local wildlife in distress. So, we find obviously with a knowledge base of education and of wildlife, people are calling us and asking us what to do when a bird hits their window and those kinds of things. So we kind of grew from just education to education and rescue and triage and transport and those kinds of things too.
Interesting. So what does that mean, I guess, non-releasable animals? I don't know what that is.
Fair question. Yeah. Non-releasable for us is an animal that couldn't survive in the wild on their own for one reason or another. So many of our animal residents have come through wildlife rehabilitation and have either been injured, orphaned, abandoned, illegally kept as pets. Something has happened to them in their lifetime that landed them at a wildlife hospital, essentially a wildlife rehab. And there they maybe couldn't be fixed. So maybe a leg or a wing or an eye doesn't work properly. Maybe they were too young, and so they were kept around people or acclimatized to people and just didn't develop the skills necessary. And then from there, it's not like, an animal can't go back to the wild. So it comes here. They have to be comfortable. The majority of wild animals that come into a wildlife rehab are not going to be comfortable around people. But in some cases, they maybe have been around people for too long, or they were young when they came in with those injuries, or they're just, inexplicably comfortable or happy to be in human company. And those are the ones that are kind of the exceptions. So they get assessed by the rehabs and then deemed non-releasable. And we apply for basically permission to keep those animals for the rest of their lives. In other cases, they've been born in captivity, so they don't have the skills, or they were illegally kept as pets and ended up sort of in the system at a rehab or through the ministry and have been, again, deemed non-releasable, but show some suitability to still living a good long life with us.
Cool. Are there animals that, I guess, don't fit the criteria to be able to stay with you? Or is that, like, can you keep most of them? Or, like,
from a rehab perspective, we absolutely can't keep most of them, simply because wild animals are instinctually afraid of people. And so, an adult that's lived in the wild its entire life that comes into rehab often isn't just going to become comfortable because humans are caring for them for that short period of time. But, in the odd case, they are, or they have a history that we don't know of that makes them more comfortable or more suitable to being around people.
And is it any kind of animal? Is it, or I guess it's wildlife animals? I'm trying to think of, like, it's not dogs. It's not like, it.
Domesticated.
No,
Yeah.
Specifically Ontario wildlife. So we work very closely with our local rehabilitation centers to sort of give that second chance to the animals that come from our own province and have come from our own area. And we did that intentionally because we want to teach people about what they share their environment with.
That's cool. So how did you get to this position in terms of your role at Speaking of Wildlife? Well, what is your role and how did you get there?
Uh, so and now I am the like director and sort of the manager of operations, if you will. I kind of do it all, from admin up to the animal care and the education piece. But I got here as started as a co-op student. I grew up on a farm. I loved animals. I wanted to be around animals and grew up with parents that always encouraged and fostered that. So I was encouraged to pursue a career as a vet from the time I was wee little and saving frogs out of the pool and birds that hit the window. But to skip school, doing the vet was coming to the farm, that kind of thing. And then I did a co-op placement at a vet clinic and I didn't fit. Uh, there were aspects of it. I mean, I still love working with animals, but there were aspects of it that just didn't sit with me. I would try to save everything. It's out of your control whether somebody chooses to treat the animal or not, and that's kind of tricky. And also, just dentistry in and of itself. I passed out the first time I watched a dog have its teeth taken out. So there are parts of it that just didn't sit well. So I kind of like went back to high school and went back to my co-op teachers and was kind of like, what else could I do with animals? Went did my research and sort of found different things in the area and decided that maybe animal care in a different aspect would be a cool avenue to explore. Uh, I worked at a shelter like with dogs and cats and then I did a co-op placement at a wildlife center called the Muskoka Wildlife Center. And my co-op interview was very much like, look at this cool animal. You'll never touch it. You should expect to clean its poop. You should expect to, do all of this dirty work, but you'll probably never touch this animal. And I was like, cool, I'm game. Let's do it. Uh, sure. As long as I'm around them, right? So I started as a co-op student at the Muskoka Wildlife Center, and I worked there for I think it was about 8 years. Decided there that I wanted to study wildlife, and then went on to the University of Guelph to get my Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Biology. Every year, going back to the Wildlife Center in the summer. Got a job working with birds of prey there and doing the same kind of education. Really just solidified that was my niche. That was where I wanted to stay. And then in 2013, the Muskoka Wildlife Center was forced to close due to highway expansion, and we got an opportunity. So I was able, eventually in 2016, to take over the Muskoka Wildlife Center's education realm, which was speaking of wildlife. So this organization has actually been in existence since 1989, was part of that first facility that I volunteered at or did a co-op at, and now I get to run it.
That's so cool.
Kind of a
Wow.
long,
like that.
convoluted
I
story,
know.
but yeah, I've been with the same place for almost 20 years now.
That's very cool.
Well, it speaks to the life, the passion that you have for animals and just the amount of knowledge that you must have accumulated because wildlife is very expansive. Like there's a lot of species, a lot of, um, things, just animals in the area, right? So to be able to, I guess, have at least some level of knowledge to be able to care for them, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I was just having a conversation with somebody about how we learn, and I said I always learned by like repeating. And so I've found a way to be constantly learning by basically teaching people the things that I'm learning and the things that we're picking up. And it is constantly evolving because not only is the industry changing and we're always striving to do better for the animals in care, but somebody might call me tomorrow and say, hey, like, would you like this species? We have a non-releasable such and such, and maybe I've never worked with that before, so then I've got to go back and relearn that animal and read husbandry guides and basically learn from the ground up how to take care of something totally new.
Mm.
How do you my question is how do you have the confidence to do that? Because I would be afraid to hurt it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you have to be humble. I'll never know everything there is to know about caring for an animal. There will always be curveballs. We do the best we can with what we've got and with the information we have now. And like I say, it's always evolving, it's always changing. So you have to be open to learning and to finding out sometimes the hard way that maybe that wasn't the best decision. And just, doing the workshops and constantly researching and talking to the professionals and those kinds of things. I mean, we are constantly learning. So it's probably less about, having the confidence that I know it all and can do it all, and more just about knowing that I'll just constantly have to be learning and evolving and changing what we're doing to make sure we're doing the best for the animals in our care. And if I have absolutely no idea, I also have to be able to say, I have absolutely no idea how to care for that. I think that maybe this isn't the right fit.
Yeah.
But I guess that would never be a reason for you not to take an animal, I guess. Just because you don't know about or you've never worked with the animal before, wouldn't necessarily be a reason. Like I'm assuming, I don't know, but like wouldn't be a reason to say no, we can't take them, right?
No, it would be a reason for us to say, hold up. We've never worked with that species. Let me, get some husbandry manuals. Let me talk to some other keepers, some professionals. Let us take the time to figure out that we are the right fit and that we can give that animal everything it needs. And there have absolutely been cases where we've had to say, we simply don't have the facilities. We simply, just don't have the resources to care for an animal that big or that requires, a pond or those different features. If we can't do it, sometimes we have to say, we just don't have the ability to do it. But generally, yeah, if it's a new species to us, we just want to make sure we're well equipped and prepared and have the appropriate space and facilities for that animal.
Cool. So is there, I guess, do you have, I know it's Ontario Wildlife, but do you see more of one species versus another that comes in typically, or is it pretty varied? Or
I would argue that I can never predict what somebody might call us with. For our purposes, at least, I can't say that the rehabs are going to have a particular animal that is going to be more likely non-releasable than others. By sheer numbers, I could tell you that I will probably get more calls about squirrels and raccoons than any other species, simply because those are the two animals that people try to keep in their houses
oh
for
my,
too long.
seriously?
There
As
is,
pets?
well, I mean, there's an abundance of them, arguably, and there's no shortage of squirrels and raccoons in the wild. And then, yeah, they are the animal that people are like, oh, I saw it on TikTok. I should totally have a raccoon in my house.
What?
And
I can't believe people think that.
and then they do, and then that changes, and then they call me because their pet raccoon has gone wily, and or somebody has found out they have it and they shouldn't, and a whole array of stories I will hear sort of by end of summer of animals that people have tried to keep in their house, probably with the best of intentions initially because they found an orphaned baby and they wanted to help it, but
Right, and then you get attached.
and then
I
you get
get it.
attached, and I totally understand
Yeah.
why it happens to some degree. But on the same token, it happens so often that it's sad that we have to predict that people are going to call us about those. And we're at capacity. We have 4 squirrels and 2 raccoons, and we just don't have the facilities for more. So if people hopefully, see our programs or learn from us that it's a bad idea, maybe I'll get fewer calls someday.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, if raising it from a baby, like if you saved an animal, I feel like that makes sense now. I thought people were just scooping them up out of
Yeah. I thought squirrel.
You are actually crazy if you just try to catch a wild squirrel or raccoon and bring it into your house.
Yeah, that's what I was picturing. So I was like, people are trying to take them home. Okay. No, but yes, rescuing the little baby ones. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we have a shortage of rehabilitation centers. They're all volunteer run and they're all charities, and so unfortunately, there isn't going to be enough rehabs to deal with how many raccoons or squirrels end up in those positions, and so that's how it happens. I'd like to believe that the majority of people are doing it with good intentions rather than ill-advised pet ownership.
Yeah. And that's sort of where I wanted to ask you because, we've been kind of talking about I guess, going around of all the different things that Speaking of Wildlife sort of does or interact with, like rehab centers and stuff like that. And I was kind of wondering if you could kind of tell me a little bit more about, I guess, the industry, because you mentioned that it's changing, right? But what does that industry look like? Because I don't know very many places that do like rehab, wildlife rehab, or like, that keeps wildlife animals, right? That are non-releasable. So like, what is that industry like?
That's a good question. From the wildlife rehab side of things, I mean, we're not a rehab ourselves, so I'm kind of speaking to something that isn't exactly my forte, but I think we're seeing there is definitely a push towards helping animals that we find in distress. And so they're, to my knowledge, probably busier than ever because people are wanting to help wildlife when they find them in need. And people are learning a bit more about those rehabs. And so the rehabs are, support your local rehab. Because they're busy and then we're coming up to baby season and they'll see, thousands of animals through the spring and summer because there are few of them, but there is a definite interest in helping wildlife in distress. When it comes to our industry more specifically, like we call ourselves a wildlife education center, but we are licensed by the Ministry of Natural Resources as a zoo. And then so that muddies the waters a little bit because now you're talking about an industry where people are keeping wild animals in captivity. And that's a mixed bag. There are facilities that are licensed like ours, but in Ontario, the laws vary from place to place. The overarching law is that you can't keep native wildlife or Ontario wildlife as a pet or in your home or without a license. So there are licensed facilities like ours because we deal specifically with Ontario wildlife. But, the zoo industry as a whole is a little bit different than that and varies from place to place and depends on which municipality you're in and what your local bylaws are and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a little different. There's not a whole lot of facilities like us. There's a few out there, but yeah, we kind of lumped in with those zoos and stuff.
And what causes someone, I guess, I'm trying to picture, how does an animal end up in a wildlife rehab and then somehow manages or ends up in Speaking of Wildlife? Like, what is that? Like, why do animals, or how do animals end up there, I guess? And like, how do they end up in your care potentially?
Yeah, and I guess the easiest way to sort of explain that one is with some of our stories. We'll call it one of my favorite stories from recent editions is we have a couple of opossums. We have Toes and Tails, the opossums. And it's one of my favorite stories because it kind of comes full circle. When I started my career, we saw so few opossums in the province that when people saw them, they thought they were giant sewer rats. And now people are seeing them and they know what it is. I mean, the opossum has an excellent PR team. They're on stickers, they're on shirts. They're like, people are promoting them as loving ticks and all these things. So now people see them and know, hey, that's a Virginia opossum. So Toes and Tails actually came to us because their mom was unfortunately hit by a car and killed. But somebody saw that happen or saw an opossum on the side of the road and knew enough to stop because opossums are marsupials. They have a pouch on their belly to carry their babies in. And they knew that if it was a female and had a pouch, it could have babies. So even though mom was deceased, she actually had 12 babies in her pouch.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So yeah, so that was just like a good Samaritan kind of thing. They found an opossum that was injured, they thought, found out it was deceased, found the babies, scooped everybody up and brought them to a rehab. Then the rehab gets to work trying to save these babies, obviously without their mom. Some of those, there was 12. Some of them, unfortunately, were also killed by the car collision. Others were raised up good and strong and went back to the wild. And then in the case of Toes and Tails, they were injured. So his tail is bent right at his bum, 90 degrees. So it no longer functions properly. It doesn't hang behind him or below him and hold on to things quite like it's supposed to. And Toes had some injuries to her toes as well as her tail. So those things are pretty vital to an opossum to climb. And so as these guys grew up, they started to notice that they weren't doing natural behavior. They weren't able to climb. They weren't able to hold on or grip the way they should. They were pretty sedentary, couch potatoes, and picky eaters, which is also abnormal for opossums. They're supposed to be omnivores and scavengers. So these two were very special and were identified as such at a pretty young age. So the rehab at that point knows those guys are going to struggle to survive in the wild, and they have to make a call. In some cases, like if those guys were, feisty little buggers acting like wild opossums, and they wouldn't be comfortable around people or fearful of people, they would have been euthanized because they didn't stand a good chance on either side of the spectrum. But because these guys needed that extra little care and the physical rehab when they were younger, and they were given the best chance possible to physically survive in the wild, they got, a second chance. They got reassessed to see if they might be comfortable enough to stay with people. And that assessment's made on both sides. So the rehab, obviously, they're the ones that care for the animals day in and day out and notice if an animal starts coming towards people. If it's not, in a possum's case, they open their mouths and show their teeth, and they make like kind of a hissing noise, and they flop over and play dead if they're really afraid of you. And these guys weren't doing any of that.
Right.
So some of those, sometimes it's just making an assessment that like, okay, these guys are not afraid of us. And so they make that assessment first, and then they call us, and we basically work with them, go down, meet the animals, spend time with the animals, and figure out whether that is the right fit and whether we agree that the animals aren't fearful of us. And then we would apply for permission to transfer the animal from the rehab to our permit, and then we would give it a go. We would bring them here and start working with them, train them, and all of our animals participate willingly in our program. So you have to you have to put that time in to really make sure that they want to spend the time with us and interact with us in order to do our programs. And some work out that way and some don't. Some stay and they're on display and people get to look at them there instead of in our education programs.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. That's really neat. The determination of whether an animal is suitable and just for hanging out, basically, is they're going to be okay. Because I think it's as much for our safety as it is for theirs too, right? Because you wouldn't want to cause, I would think, unnecessary distress, with an animal that would really struggle with humans around. So
Exactly. And there have been cases where, we have brought an animal into our care and then realized that our facility wasn't the right fit for them, either because this was an animal that we had hoped would, come around to training and participating and being part of our education programs, and they just weren't, or the facilities thing again. So if it was an animal that, doesn't mind being on display, doesn't mind being around people and kind of the commotion that people bring, but here they weren't going to be on display or teach people. There might be a facility that has an outdoor enclosure, a space that the animal can live basically undisturbed, but still teach people. And, giving that sort of purpose to an animal in captivity rather than just keeping them for the sake of keeping them.
Mm-hmm. So when you're speaking of programs, I know I saw on your website that you do quite a few things, I guess, with the animals in terms of education, which is pretty cool. And you can talk about it in a bit. I was wondering if you also said that it was kind of a zoo that you guys are kind of fall under, like, or have that idea. Does that mean that people can come and I guess look at the animals?
Yes, loosely. When we don't stop by unannounced. No, when we built the center, we very much built it to be a functional facility and a sanctuary to the animals. So we didn't ever intend to have people coming through constantly. A little bit changed in 2020, like we always had an open door policy. We've always been open to people that had an interest that wanted to book a private tour with us. But when, COVID hit and suddenly traveling offsite and going anywhere where people gathered to watch a show, it became nearly impossible. We had to sort of reinvent the wheel a little bit. So we started kind of slowly by just hosting um, small events at the center where we would do private tours sort of on rotation. Now we basically offer private tours throughout the year for a fee, and those are guided by one of our interpreters. So we tell you about each animal. You still have to learn something, and sometimes spend more than 30 seconds at an exhibit. But yeah, so we do that. It's still sort of that behind the scenes. You're getting a private encounter with the animals or a private tour with the animals. And it still allows us to sort of govern how often we're inviting people onto our property. And we offer only outdoor tours, partly because biosecurity measures to make sure that we're not tracking anything into where the animals are staying, but also it allows us to make sure we're not sort of overwhelming the animals. If we've got anybody that might be in training or might not be comfortable with a large group of people, we can kind of control those circumstances a bit. So yeah, it allows us to open our doors to people, but still maintain that the animals are our priority.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, zoos are also house wild animals as well, I guess, is also the idea. But I don't know how people make that determination about whether, you can have a large group of people or the animals can be around large group of people. But I think it just makes sense. They're wild animals, right? Like some don't do well being looked at by hundreds of eyes or something.
Well, it's the same for people. Like I wouldn't appreciate hordes of people coming past my house. They're just like
Exactly. And it's one of those things that I always tell people, because they'll say when they come to our facility, because the animals here are here because they are comfortable around people and they've gone through a long sort of assessment process. They'll see our wolf right up close and be like, oh, like, it's so nice to see them. You go to such and such facility and they're always in the back and they're always hidden or whatever. And I try to explain to people that that's a good thing. And, if you go to a large zoo and the animals are staying far away or they're staying, hidden or those kinds of things, it's giving those animals the choice and the control when they are subjected to large groups of people. If they don't want to be seen or if they feel like lounging in the sun, they have those options. A facility where and our animals have that option as well. They just choose to be close to us in most cases. And sometimes they don't, but in a lot of cases, you're going to see almost everything here because the animals want to come out. But large facilities that see lots of people, sometimes the animals are so non-bothered by you that they're going to do whatever it is that they feel like doing, and it's despite you. So
yeah.
so that they
That's
don't,
interesting.
yeah, like it's a good thing that the animals. I would be more worried if it was a facility that had a small space and you saw every animal every time, because a large space that allows the animals to be hidden if they want to be hidden is a good thing.
Yeah, makes sense. And when it comes to, I guess, the education programs that you guys do, can you kind of speak about what is it that you guys do, right, at Speaking of Wildlife?
So our education programs, we travel both on and offsite. Obviously, we just talked about the on-site tours. Offsite, uh, usually are smaller animals that participate in this. Logistically, it's just a little difficult to cart the wolf around safely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, typically our education programs, we do a variety. We do like a presentation style or a show style with some of the animals. We do birthday parties, we do displays and exhibits. So it sort of depends on what fits the venue and what fits the event best. When we travel, and again, the animals are going to vary depending on who is suited better to which kind of style of program. But our kind of typical is when we bring about 4 or 5 animals with us to a program, and we bring them out one at a time. You show you how cute this little opossum is and then tell you its story. And we're trying to tell you this story and we're trying to tell you the information in a way that's interactive and that's fun. And at the end of the presentation, you should feel like you had fun and have no idea that you learned something along the way as well.
The sneak attack of knowledge.
Right? When you watch this back, you'll see that I did it to you with the opossum story.
Yep. Because I didn't know they were marsupials. There you go.
Yeah, that's true. I learned something.
Check. So that's our style of program is, we want to bring sort of fun interpreters. We want to ask you questions, want to get you involved. In some cases, the animals participate in training, leading up to this. It enriches their lives. It keeps them active. It means that they're participating because they want to. And sometimes it's fun. Sometimes the raccoon just picks something up and puts it in a bowl and you're like, woo. And then we can show you that he picks anything up and puts it in the bowl. And And so you get to watch, an animal sort of figure these things out and how smart they actually are. And I can train a raccoon to put trash in a garbage can if I want to.
Fascinating.
That's interesting.
Instead of taking it out.
Yeah. And we show, not to stick with the raccoon, but we also bring an aquarium and we put treats in it and you can see his little hands at work, which can feel 10 times better than ours can. So you watch him as he feels like, oh, that's a piece of broccoli and that's an apple. So you see that he kind of has this, like he's feeling around without even looking because he's always watching the audience and the sky and seeing what's going on around him while he's literally choosing what he wants to eat from this basin of water in front of him. And then we can talk about this really cool thing is demonstrating how raccoons hunt in the wild. And yeah, so we try to make our program sort of fun and interactive in that way and teach you along the way.
That's super cool. So I guess, is it open? I was like, how can I see one of these programs? What can I sign up for? Like, I guess, is it kind of groups and education centers that or is it, I know we talked about birthday parties,
Yeah, it's almost anything. A lot of time it's an organized event. So we in the summertime we visit a handful of local resorts weekly. So we're there, visiting their guests. We do a lot of provincial parks because again, you want to teach people about what they might encounter in the park and give them sort of an outlet for those questions that they might have. Park staff are also great for that, but giving them sort of an experience and then an opportunity to ask questions. We do libraries and schools and, the whole gamut, retirement homes, basically anywhere. It is a paid service. So, typically we are hired, we're contacted for an event and then we attend. We're also switching sort of our mentality a little bit locally because we want people to know what we do here in the community. So we will have a couple of events, probably in the spring and in the fall. Summer's a bit busy for us, but hopefully, we'll be able to host a couple of events annually that are all offered, by donation. So we can open up our services and you can catch maybe a program in town that if we can find a venue, that you could come in and enjoy a presentation and not necessarily have to be at that park on that day or at that library for that event. So that's something to look forward to and stay tuned because we're looking for that venue right now to try to find a place to host one of these local presentations and see if our community wants to come out and see us.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Like, I'm glad I got.
I want to see toes and tails.
I know. The opossums. And I guess in terms of, because you mentioned it's a paid service, and I'm assuming it's a not for profit, correct? Speaking of wildlife, that those funds go into helping to support care for the animals too, is what so
Yeah,
it's a good cause.
Yeah, so it's we have to keep the animals fed. So it's the best way that we've sort of found, and it's tried and true, that by providing these programs at a fee, we will ensure that we can afford proper diets and veterinary care. And if we have to fix or build an enclosure for an animal, then, we've got those resources to do that. And of course, we need the people to do that as well, and the building and the lights and all that stuff. So that just kind of makes sure that we can pay the bills and then yeah, we do have people. A lot of them are volunteers, and then a couple of paid staff throughout the year, and then usually in the summer, kind of an influx of summer students to work for us. To keep everybody well fed and taken care of, and that's where all the money goes.
There you go.
Well, that's yeah. I didn't think about that, but I'm assuming taking care of the animals and keeping them alive, I guess, for the rest of their life, right? Like that's very expensive. Like you said you have 50 plus animals, right? So that's a lot of mouths to feed.
Yeah, yeah, it is a lot of mouths to feed, and the veterinary care alone. I mean, all of these animals see a vet at some point throughout the year. Some, require inoculations or vaccinations and regular exams and that kind of stuff. But because we're also caring for animals with special needs, you're looking at specialized veterinary care. So we see a veterinary dentist for our beaver, and we have an ophthalmologist for one of our falcons. And so obviously they're not specific to that, but those are the examples I have. We have a beaver with a dental issue. Like that's weird. And I had to make a lot of calls to find a beaver dentist.
There you go. See,
Yeah.
things you learn.
I know. Who knew there was a thing?
She might argue there isn't a thing. It's been a tricky dental issue.
Yeah, yeah. Because they're wildlife, right? It's not your average dog or cat or bird or kind of, like we've talked about the domesticated animals that can go to kind of any vet. These are going to be like, it's a different level of veterinary care for the beaver.
Yeah, we have an array. We have a whole handful of vets that we work with for depending on the issue and what the animal requires and each vet's abilities or comfort. We have a veterinary clinic that we work with for all of the regular routine sort of vaccinations and exams, but they aren't dentists, or they aren't perfectly comfortable if there's a strange sort of species specific problem. Then we might see a different vet for that. We have an avian vet, and we have wildlife vets at our disposal and that kind of stuff. So yeah,
Interesting.
it's like a whole handful.
And I guess I have one more sort of question here. I think, but I guess my idea of why, speaking of wildlife, I guess why is wildlife conservation important to you? I guess in that sense, like why is this important for people to do it? Like as you mentioned, it's starting to become more and more, or it sounds like it's starting to become more and more on top of minds of people. Like there are more people that want to keep animals alive, I guess, that find that important. And I guess I just wanted to kind of think of your point of view, or see from your point of view, why do you think conservation is important?
There's so many reasons, but I think from our perspective and what we see more often and what we're sort of dealing with hands on, humans have a lot of impact on our environment and on the earth and on our natural resources and stuff like that. And for me, one of the most difficult parts of this job is just seeing how we have negatively impacted wildlife and how we sometimes react to those changes. So, we see changes in wildlife, or we see more sightings or more wildlife encounters after a development in a particular area. Or, we see the effects of pollution, or the effects of, people trying to deal with wildlife in their backyard with limited knowledge. And so when we see these kind of negative impacts and we're the ones seeing it firsthand and seeing the animals fighting it, on a sort of smaller scale, that's where we think we can have our impact. That's where we can, if we give people a cool experience or a cool encounter with a wild animal, maybe next time they'll think twice about putting out rodenticide, or maybe they'll think twice about not stopping their car if they've hit an animal, unfortunately, because, I can tell a story of that time I stopped because I wasn't sure if the animal had passed, and only to find out that it hadn't. and that animal went on to make a full recovery and go back to the wild one day. So being able to sort of share our experiences, share the stories that our animals have brought to us, and hopefully making that connection for people and what's in their backyard. Maybe we'll be able to continue that trend of people, seeing something happen and trying to fix it. Or maybe it won't even happen in the first place at some point where, some of these things will be reduced because they had that connection, because they had that experience. So that's kind of like the small scale. I mean, obviously on a larger scale, we just want to see wildlife able to live where they lived before we got here. And
Yeah.
sort of, we want to see our natural spaces maintained and conserved, and those species able to continue to live their lives despite our existence in their environment. So yeah, that's kind of, I mean, we could go on all day about why we want to teach. Fundamentally, that, trying to evoke change here is why we do what we do.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Just the idea of, I think, living harmoniously with nature in that sense, right? Like we're to try not to necessarily, like you said, not take away their spaces, right, and have them have the balance of the ecosystem cause a bunch of issues, I guess, right? But to be able to kind of be able to live side by side with the animals that live here, that are native here, that should live here because this is where they live, right? So yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
That's all of my questions that I have. Is there anything that we didn't get into that you think would be important for people to know before we end up wrapping up and me asking you about like where people can find Speaking of Wildlife or where can they contact and stuff?
I mean, that was a lot of great questions. The only thing that really comes to mind, and it's because it's top of mind, and it's maybe may or may not be podcast related. We are currently in need of a vehicle to do all of these things we just talked about. So we're currently kind of evaluating or following all leads and all opportunities, and we have a van fund started to try to get us rolling again. Because right now we're using my personal Jeep, which is too small.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not
I bet.
exactly
Yeah.
the most ideal situation. It's working for now. I'm not going to complain, but ultimately we're looking for a bigger van.
Yeah.
Exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, I did see that. I did see that that post that you're looking for a new van, because I think yours, the one that you had, like drove for like 400,000 kilometers or something is what I was looking at. I was like, man, that's a lot.
Hubby's a mechanic and it came in handy. But we basically last summer, like in August, our van broke down on the road at a really terrible time. And so we just kind of like limped it along because we had bigger fish to fry at the moment. And then it went over the 400,000 kilometer mark over Christmas. And we were like, oh, it might live forever. No, it did not. We limped it along for as long as we could, and now it's officially no longer worth investing in.
There you go.
Mhm.
That's impressive. That's a lot of kilometers.
That's a lot of kilometers. Well, it kind of speaks to, how often you guys go and kind of educate people and go through the programs, right? Like it's yeah, that would be really important. So hopefully if there's anybody that, has a van or is willing to donate a van or, something like that.
Donate money.
Or donate money for, the fund, then that would be ideal for sure. So where can people kind of, I guess, go learn more about Speaking of Wildlife and learn more about, what they need, how to volunteer or how to donate or how to do this kind of stuff for Speaking of Wildlife?
So we have a website at speakingofwildlife.ca. We also have a lovely volunteer social media manager who keeps our socials up to date. So we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. I try the TikTok thing sometimes. Still learning. So you can find us on most of the socials and on our website at speakingofwildlife.ca. And then to reach us, you can find most of the contact info on those avenues, but also just email info@speakingofwildlife.ca is probably the best way to reach us. Or you could try calling us, but my hands are often dirty or in a pond or on an animal. So sometimes getting to the phone in the moment that it's ringing is admittedly not my forte. Uh, I do try. Well, just unfortunately, a lot of the times, we're working with animals, you can't predict when you're going to get a phone call. And so it's usually at the worst possible time. You're either making meals or holding something that you don't want to then touch your phone after holding.
Yeah.
I mean, no.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, if there is nothing else, then I guess thank you very much for being part of the podcast. It was great. It was great talking to you. I learned a lot.
Yeah, I know. The secret sneak attack knowledge.
I know.
Yeah, I do have a funny story about accidentally learning things.
Oh yeah.
Go for it.
Again, it is an opossum, but we had an opossum for many years. His name was Larry, and Larry was born without eyeballs. So he was blind his entire life, and that was why Larry was with us, because he came into care when he was just a baby, obviously couldn't be released completely blind. And so he came to us at a young age. He traveled with us his whole life. And we have families that see us year after year at the same resorts. And so one of our families had met Larry. Oh gosh, if he sees this, he might be upset. But he had met Larry one year, and then he went home. And when they saw an opossum in their backyard for the first time that following, summer or fall, he was very excited to tell his neighbor all about opossums. And so he went on to tell his neighbor that opossums didn't have eyeballs. And that's why he thought they were just the most incredible species, because they could do everything they do without eyes. Luckily, his daughter was there, and she immediately corrected him and was like, "Dad, that was just Larry.
just
That
one opossum.
That opossum has eyes." He's like, "I nailed every fact except that one."
That's really cute, though.
And how proud he was to tell me that he had seen an opossum and taught his neighbor all about them. But a little bit embarrassed that he thought all of them had no eye.
Had no eyeballs. I mean, if the first opossum you've ever seen had no eyes, I would also
Precisely.
assume that they just didn't have them. Like,
It's true.
it's honest mistake.
Yeah. He did pick up that part of the story, just missed the part where it was only Larry. Well, and select others that are born that way.
But that's pretty cool, though, that you're able to learn, even with animals that have some form of, disability and some form of whatever, to be able to still, be useful and learn and be able to interact with that. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, Larry taught us a lot. He was the most adventurous opossum I have ever met. You could not keep him still, and he couldn't see anything. So he just, climb up to the top of something and basically right off the edge.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, he was built for it. He was an excellent climber, and he always saved himself. But there was a lot of learning with Larry, because you're dealing with something that, can't see, but has no idea that anybody can. So he just adapted really well to it, and we adjusted to make sure that Larry never fell far.
Oh, Larry.
Yeah, he was a very special guy. And nothing slowed him down. So that was a cool story in and of itself, because,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he was-
Overcoming adversity.
I know.
exactly. Anyway, that's one of my favorite stories.
That's okay.
Yeah, I like it. But so thank you very much again for being part of the podcast. And I hope you come back sometime and talk more about, what Speaking of Wildlife does. That's pretty cool.
I think
More
we do.
stories of
More stories. I know. I think we do have plans in the future at some point before you get super busy to maybe go meet a couple. So.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Thank you for listening to the entire episode. All the links and info you heard in this conversation will be featured in the show notes on our website, villagermagazine.ca/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to our channels like YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you're listening from so you never miss an episode. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.